I built the company's most profitable platform, and then they replaced me with a 22-year-old who couldn't even locate the project files. So here's how I made them regret it. Carson Blake's voice drifted through the glass walls of his corner office like he was narrating a documentary about his own genius. He was talking about empowering the next generation, hands slicing the air with practiced confidence, delivering buzzwords the way motivational speakers do after binging too many conference keynotes. Fresh perspectives, he said, were the real drivers of innovation. I didn't slow my stride or glance in his direction. I kept my eyes straight ahead, my coffee steady, weaving through the 7th floor cubicles at Crestlang Technologies like nothing he said could touch me. Fresh perspectives was just a polished way of excusing inexperience now, as if not knowing how anything actually worked was suddenly a strength instead of a liability that cost the rest of us overtime and antacids. I'd heard Carson perform this routine before, at the company retreat in Colorado where he preached mentorship for 20 straight minutes while I sat in the back, fully aware that I'd never be mentored because I was too busy holding the infrastructure together. Again, at the holiday party, he toasted teamwork right before handing out bonuses that somehow aligned perfectly with golf handicaps instead of measurable results. That was 18 months earlier. 18 months of 80-hour weeks, midnight calls with vendors in Singapore who didn't care about anyone's sleep cycle, and building a project management framework from nothing but stubbornness and caffeine. I called it the Phoenix Initiative, not because it rose from ashes, but because it was forged in the aftermath of Carson's last spectacular failure, the one where he approved a client portal that collapsed so completely it took my remaining faith in corporate meritocracy with it. I pitched Phoenix during a quarterly review, standing in front of executives who stared at me like I was an intern sent to fetch oat milk. I spent 45 minutes explaining real-time tracking, automated client communications, predictive analytics, and scalable architecture. Carson nodded, checked his phone, and finally said we should table it and circle back, which was corporate for, "I'm not listening, but I want to sound engaged." 3 weeks later, at 11 p.m., he emailed me telling me to move forward with Phoenix with full autonomy, reporting directly to him. Autonomy just meant I could choose which version of exhaustion to endure, while he claimed ownership of the outcome. I built the team. I pulled developers from 3 departments. I negotiated for server capacity that allegedly didn't exist until Carson's name entered the conversation. I spent 6 months in the trenches debugging code at 2 in the morning and rewriting documentation because no one else understood the integrations. Phoenix went from a slide deck fantasy into a living platform that cut delivery times by 34% and reduced client complaints by half. We rolled it out internally, then to our largest clients, Peak Industries, Altivist Group, and Dominion Analytics. The response was overwhelming. Peak's operations director sent champagne, saying I'd made their job tolerable again. Altivist's CEO mentioned us on a podcast. Dominion asked about licensing. Carson forwarded that email with a single sentence: "Great work, keep it up." No internal announcement, no recognition, just a thumbs-up emoji in Slack and the unspoken expectation that I'd continue performing miracles while he soaked up applause on conference panels. I didn't object. Complaints are a currency you only spend when you still believe someone is listening. I stopped believing that when Carson promoted a project manager named Elliot, whose greatest achievement was remembering to unmute himself on client calls. So I kept my head down and documented everything. Every decision, every email, every clause. I built folders inside folders, backups of backups, a paper trail so exhaustive it could have qualified as an archival project. Some might call it paranoia. I called it pattern recognition. I'd seen this before. Natalie in finance built a forecasting model that went to the board with her manager's name on it. Kevin in operations streamlined the supply chain and got rewarded with a lateral move into a dying product line. The game was fixed. The house always won, and the house was run by men like Carson Blake, who measured success by how good you made them look instead of what you actually delivered. Still, some embarrassingly hopeful part of me believed that this time might be different, that something undeniably successful would finally earn me a seat at the table instead of polite praise and cost of living raises that barely kept pace with inflation. I should have known better. The first warning came during a leadership meeting I wasn't invited to, when my teammate Bryce texted me from the conference room saying they were discussing Phoenix succession planning and that I should have been there. The word succession made my stomach drop. I asked what he meant. 3 dots appeared, vanished, then reappeared with a promise to explain later. The meeting dragged on for 90 minutes while I stress-ate protein bars and refreshed my inbox like answers might materialize. Afterward, Bryce came to my office, closed the door, and carefully explained that Carson wanted to transition Phoenix to broader leadership, bring in someone to scale it. Fresh energy, he'd said. I asked who. Bryce avoided my eyes and said Carson was talking to promising candidates. I thanked him for the warning and smiled the kind of smile you use when you already know how this ends. 2 weeks later, Carson called an all-hands meeting. The room smelled like catered bagels and impending disaster. I chose a seat that was neither front-row eager nor distant enough to look disengaged. Carson arrived last, accompanied by someone I didn't recognize. Early 20s, perfect haircut, suit that probably cost my monthly rent. The kind of confidence that comes from a life where doors open before you touch the handle. Carson introduced Wesley Grayson, a recent Stanford graduate with a degree in business innovation and systems design, consulting at 22. Wesley would be taking on a leadership role within Phoenix, working closely with all of us. The silence that followed wasn't polite. It was the kind where everyone freezes, waiting for the fallout. I felt eyes on me from every direction, and I kept my face blank. Wesley smiled and waved, said he was excited to learn from us, apparently unaware of the contradiction in leading something he needed to learn. Carson continued talking about synergy and the future. I stared at the Phoenix dashboard projected behind him, the one I designed pixel by pixel. After the meeting, coworkers approached me with sympathetic congratulations, insisting this was good, that I'd finally have support, that I could focus on strategy, that Wesley seemed nice. Carson intercepted me in the hallway and ushered me into his office, gestured toward a chair. I stayed standing. He told me I understood this might feel abrupt, that he valued everything I'd done, that Phoenix was remarkable, that Wesley would rely on my expertise, that institutional knowledge being a polite way of saying I'd do the work while he took the credit, and they'd call it mentorship. I asked what my new title would be, and when he blinked and said I'd continue as senior project manager with the same responsibilities, just additional support, I understood it meant the same title, same salary, more work, less credit. He told me this was a good thing, that I'd been carrying too much, and now I could breathe. And I wanted to laugh, scream, ask if he believed his own words, or if he'd lied so long he'd forgotten what truth felt like. But instead, I nodded and asked if there was anything else. And when he said that was it, and how excited he was about this next chapter, I left his office and went straight to the bathroom, locked myself in a stall and counted to 100 and back down to 0. An old trick my therapist taught me for managing professional rage. When I looked at myself in the mirror afterward, it was the same face, the same exhaustion, the same question I'd been asking for 18 months. How much more of this can you take? And it turned out not much. Wesley started the following Monday, showed up early wearing jeans and a button-down that screamed relatable but privately educated, found me at my desk reviewing vendor contracts, and said Carson told me I was the Phoenix expert and that he was basically there to learn everything from me. I welcomed him, listened as he told me to call him Wes, watched him pull up a chair without asking, and when he asked where to begin, I chose the dashboard, walking him through the client-facing portal, real-time updates, automated reporting, predictive resource allocation. spending 90 minutes explaining the basics while he nodded, took notes on his iPad, and asked surface-level questions that showed he understood the what, but not the why. When he said it was so cool and that he could already see 5 ways to optimize it, I agreed neutrally, and when he casually mentioned that Carson wanted him to present Phoenix to the board next month and that I'd help prep the deck, there it was, the ask that wasn't really an ask. The assumption I'd package my work so he could present it while I watched from the audience. And I said, of course, smiling with my mouth but not my eyes. Over the next 2 weeks, I watched Wesley settle into a role that should have been mine, as Carson gave him the office next to his own, the one with windows that actually opened, invited him to executive lunches, introduced him to board members, and CC'd him on strategic emails, while I trained him, explained vendor relationships, client preferences, and the technical debt we were managing, and answered his questions, which ranged from thoughtful to, "Did you really just ask me that?" My favorite was when he asked if we'd considered gamifying the user experience, and I explained slowly that this was enterprise project management software, not a mobile app, only for him to suggest achievement badges for hitting milestones, leaving me staring at him while he shrugged and said he was just thinking outside the box, even though inside the box was product market fit and sustainable architecture. The board presentation arrived faster than I wanted. Wesley asked me to build the deck, which surprised no one, and I spent 3 days compiling data, designing slides, and scripting talking points, only for him to reply that it was awesome and he'd made a few tweaks that included a painful color scheme, pointless animations, and rewritten explanations full of phrases like synergistic optimization and paradigm-shifting deliverables, which I quietly fixed as much as I could before sending it back. The day of the board meeting, I wasn't invited, and watched from my desk as Wesley walked into the conference room carrying my work like a student turning in someone else's homework, presenting for 45 minutes while Bryce texted me updates about him struggling with technical questions, fumbling vendor contract details, and Carson jumping in to rescue him. And when it ended, Carson sent a company-wide email praising Wesley's commanding presence and strategic vision, mentioning my name once in the closing paragraph as part of the entire Phoenix team, like I was an interchangeable cog in a machine I'd built with my bare hands. That night, I opened my laptop and started drafting something I'd been considering for weeks. Not a resignation letter, not yet. Just a document titled Contingencies, listing every contract clause I'd negotiated, every vendor relationship built on personal rapport, every access credential tied to my email, and every piece of institutional knowledge that lived in my head instead of on our servers. Because Phoenix wasn't just software, it was relationships, context, and trust, almost all of it held together by me. As I typed, I imagined what would happen if I stopped being the glue, if I let them try to run it without the person who understood every dependency, workaround, and reason things were built the way they were. And the thought made me smile for the first time in weeks. So I saved the document in an encrypted folder and went to bed, feeling something I hadn't felt in months: control. The breaking point came 3 weeks later, after Wesley had been leading Phoenix for a month, mostly by attending meetings I'd set up, asking me to re-explain things, and taking credit for decisions I'd made before he arrived. And while he was learning how to perform competence in a way that satisfied Carson's low bar for leadership, the email arrived with the subject, Phoenix Expansion, exciting news from Carson Blake, and I opened it with the same enthusiasm I'd reserve for a root canal, as he announced we were expanding Phoenix to 5 new enterprise clients that quarter, calling it a testament to Wesley's leadership and strategic vision. Please join me in congratulating him on this incredible milestone. We'll be celebrating at Happy Hour Friday. Drinks on me. Wesley's leadership, Wesley's vision. I read it 3 times, each pass making my blood pressure spike. The 5 new clients, all companies I'd been cultivating for months, cold emails, exploratory calls, demo presentations I delivered personally, while Wesley was probably still figuring out how to operate the coffee machine in the break room. Bryce appeared at my desk 5 minutes later. "Did you see?" "I saw, Harper. This is, everyone knows you landed those deals." "Does everyone?" I asked, because Carson seemed pretty convinced it was Wesley's strategic vision. "You have to say something." "To whom? Carson? He's the one rewriting history." Bryce didn't have an answer. Nobody did. I spent the rest of the day in a fog, mechanically responding to emails, attending meetings without actually hearing a word, my brain busy doing calculations. How much longer could I tolerate this? How much more of my work could I watch someone else claim? At what point did self-respect outweigh a steady paycheck? That night, I pulled up listings, senior project manager roles at other companies, consulting positions, anything that wasn't this. But something stopped me from applying. Not hope, I'd abandoned that weeks ago. More like unfinished business, a need to see this through in a way that made it absolutely clear what they were losing. I opened my contingencies document and started adding sections: vendor contacts, contract clauses, system dependencies. Everything that made Phoenix work existed in my head or my personal files, rather than on our servers. The next morning, Wesley stopped by my desk. "Hey, did you see Carson's email?" "Pretty exciting, right?" "Congratulations," I said without looking up. "I couldn't have done it without your support. Seriously, you're like the backbone of this whole thing." "The backbone? The invisible structure holding everything up while other people got to be the face, the voice, the credit?" "Happy to help," I said, still not meeting his eyes. He lingered, clearly wanting something. "So, for the expansion, I'm thinking we need to overhaul the onboarding process, make it more streamlined. I was hoping you could draft a proposal." "Sure," I said. "When do you need it?" "End of week. I'm presenting the expansion strategy to Carson on Monday." Of course he was. "I'll send you something," I said. He left satisfied, and I returned to my document. Under a new section labeled Knowledge Transfer Requirements, I began listing everything Wesley would need to know to actually run Phoenix without me. The list grew to 7 pages. 7 pages of context, relationships, technical decisions, and institutional knowledge. 7 pages Wesley didn't have and couldn't acquire in any reasonable timeframe. I looked at that list and felt something click into place. A decision crystallizing from anger, exhaustion, and the sudden, absolute certainty that I deserved better than this. That night, I drafted my resignation letter. Not the polite professional version they'd expect, the real one, the one that said exactly what I thought about Carson's leadership, Wesley's unearned position, and a company that valued performance theater over actual performance. I didn't send it, not yet. But having it written felt like loading a gun. Now I just needed to decide when to pull the trigger. The answer came Friday at the happy hour. I almost didn't go, spent 20 minutes convincing myself that celebrating Wesley's success in claiming my work was a circle of hell Dante forgot to include. But Bryce insisted, and I figured I'd make one appearance before leaving early. The bar was one of those trendy places with Edison bulbs and reclaimed wood that charged $15 for cocktails that tasted like furniture polish. Carson had reserved a section in the back, and by the time I arrived, it was packed with colleagues in various stages of intoxication. Wesley held court near the bar, already 2 drinks in, telling a story about cold calling one of the clients. And I just told them, we're not selling you software, we're selling you time back. Your time is valuable. Phoenix gives you that. I'd said those exact words on the discovery call I'd led 3 months ago, while Wesley was still updating his LinkedIn profile to available to start. People laughed, clinked glasses, and treated Wesley like he'd invented sliced bread, instead of just taking credit for someone else's bakery. Carson spotted me and waved me over. "Harper, there she is. Come celebrate with us." I navigated through the crowd, accepting congratulatory comments from coworkers who genuinely didn't know better, and reached Carson's circle, where he stood with Wesley and 2 board members I recognized from company photos. "Harper, do you know Robert and Fiona from the board?" I shook hands and smiled, my professional smile. "Carson's been telling us about your work on Phoenix," Fiona said. "Sounds like you've been instrumental in getting it off the ground." "She's the secret weapon," Carson said, throwing an arm around my shoulder like we were old friends. "Best project manager we have. Wesley's lucky to have her support." Support? Always support. Never lead, never architect, never the person who actually built the thing we were celebrating. "Must be exciting to see your work expand," Robert said to me directly. Before I could answer, Carson jumped in. "Wesley's really taken it to the next level. Harper did great with the foundation, but Wes has the vision to scale it properly. That's why I brought him on." Something in me snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically, more like a cable stretched too tight, finally reaching its breaking point with a quiet snap nobody else could hear. "Actually," I said, my voice steady, "I should clarify something." Carson's smile froze. Wesley stopped mid-sip of his craft IPA. "I didn't just work on the foundation of Phoenix, I built Phoenix. The entire architecture, the vendor relationships, and the client acquisition strategy. All of it for 18 months. Fiona blinked. "Oh, I thought Wesley built it." I smiled. "Common misconception. Wesley's been here 5 weeks. He's still learning how to access the, project drive." The circle went quiet. Carson's face cycled through several colors, landing somewhere between red and purple. "Harper," he said carefully, "let's," I interrupted, "let's be clear about who did what, because I'm tired of watching other people collect accolades for work I did while pretending my contributions were just support." Robert looked uncomfortable. Wesley looked like he wanted to sink into the reclaimed wood floor. "You're being inappropriate," Carson said, his voice dropping to that tone men use when they want to intimidate you into silence. "I'm being accurate. But don't worry, Carson, you won't have to manage this awkwardness much longer." I pulled out my phone, opened my email, and hit send on the resignation letter I'd been carrying around like a loaded gun. Carson's phone buzzed. So did Wesley's. So did everyone else in the circle who was on the company email system. "I quit," I said simply. "Effective 2 weeks from today. Wesley can figure out Phoenix on his own now. I'm sure his strategic vision will be more than enough." I set my drink down, untouched, and walked out of the bar. Behind me, I heard Carson calling my name, heard the murmur of confused voices, and someone asked, "Wait, did she just quit via mass email?" Yes, I did, and it felt absolutely incredible. The weekend passed in a blur of ignored calls and increasingly frantic emails. Carson tried to reach me 6 times on Saturday alone. I let every call go to voicemail. His messages progressed from "let's talk about this" to "I'm sure we can work something out" to "you're under contract and need to complete your notice period professionally." I was 2 weeks professional as hell, just not in the way he wanted. Monday morning, I showed up exactly at 9 a.m., nothing earlier, nothing later. Walked past the reception desk where Kelsey gave me a look of mingled sympathy and awe. News had clearly spread. My desk looked the same, but the atmosphere felt different. People kept glancing at me, then quickly looking away like I was a solar eclipse they weren't supposed to stare at directly. I logged into my computer and opened a fresh document titled Phoenix Transition Documentation. Then I started writing the most thorough, technically accurate, and completely useless handoff document in corporate history. Every process was explained in perfect detail with no context. Every vendor listed had no relationship history. Every system dependency was documented with no explanation of why it mattered. If they wanted my work without wanting me, they'd get exactly that. The work stripped of all the institutional knowledge that made it functional. Carson appeared at my desk around 10 a.m., looking like he'd slept in his car. My office now. I saved my document and followed him. He closed the door harder than necessary. What the hell was that on Friday? My resignation? You humiliated me in front of board members. I corrected a misunderstanding about who built Phoenix. If that felt like humiliation, maybe examine why the truth stung so much. His jaw clenched. You signed a 2-year contract with an at-will employment clause. I checked with a lawyer. I hadn't, but he didn't need to know that. I'm giving you 2 weeks. That's more than required. This is about Wesley, he said. You're jealous. I laughed. Actually laughed. Jealous of what? Watching an underqualified kid get handed my work because he knows the right people? I'm not jealous, Carson. I'm done. You won't get another job in this industry. I'll make sure of it. Threats? Really? That's your play? I leaned back in my chair. Go ahead, tank my reputation, but you should know that most of our key vendors have my personal contact information. Several clients have already reached out asking if I'm available for consulting. And those board members Friday? Fiona emailed me Saturday asking for my LinkedIn. The color drained from his face. You can't poach our clients. I'm not poaching anyone, but I can't control whether they choose to work with me independently after I leave. That's called a free market, Carson. You should look into it. The non-compete covers direct competitors. I'm not joining a competitor. I'm going independent. Again, I had a lawyer review everything, or at least Googled it extensively. He stared at me, realizing he had no leverage. There's no way to force me to stay, no way to punish me for leaving beyond petty threats that would probably backfire. What do you want? He finally asked. Nothing. I'm leaving. That's it? There must be something. A raise, a promotion, your own team? 18 months too late, Carson. I stood up. I'll spend my 2 weeks documenting what I can, but I'm not training Wesley. I'm not holding his hand. You wanted him to lead Phoenix. Let him lead it. I left his office before he could respond. Back at my desk, I continued my documentation project. Every technical detail was spelled out with perfect clarity and zero useful context. It was like writing assembly instructions in a foreign language. Technically accurate, but functionally useless unless you already knew what you were doing. Wesley tried to approach me around lunch. Harper, can we talk? I'm busy. Look, I didn't know you felt. You didn't know because you didn't ask. You just assumed you deserved to walk into a leadership role on a project you didn't build, and everyone let you because that's how this place works. That's not fair. Welcome to my world, Wesley. He opened his mouth, closed it, and walked away. Over the next week, the cracks started showing, small ones at first. Wesley couldn't access certain vendor portals because they were tied to my personal email. He couldn't find documentation on client preferences because it lived in my head. He struggled to explain technical decisions because he didn't understand the reasoning behind them. I watched from my desk as he ping-ponged between panic and false confidence, trying to maintain the illusion that he could handle everything while clearly drowning. On Tuesday of my second week, one of our major clients, Pettage Industries, reached out directly to my personal email. Harper, heard you're leaving Crestline. Wanted to let you know we're exploring other options for project management. Would you be available to consult independently? I forwarded the email to my personal archive and replied professionally. I'll be available after my notice period ends. Happy to discuss options. Then Wednesday, another client made contact. Then a vendor asked if I'd be consulting. Then a former colleague who'd left 6 months ago reached out to see if I'd be interested in joining her startup. The market was speaking. Turns out when you do good work, people notice. Just not always the people signing your paychecks. Thursday afternoon, Carson called an emergency meeting. Wesley, me, and the senior leadership team. We filed into the conference room like mourners at a funeral nobody wanted to attend. Carson stood at the head of the table, visibly stressed. We need to discuss contingency planning for Harper's departure. Contingency planning? I repeated. I've been documenting everything. Yes, but Wesley hit some roadblocks accessing certain systems. Which systems? Wesley pulled out a list. The vendor portals, the client relationship database, some of the contract management tools. I scanned it. Those are tied to my personal credentials because when I set them up, it said it would take 3 months to create company accounts. I used my own to move faster. Can you transfer access? Carson asked. Some of it, the vendors will need to approve new contacts, which requires, how long for transfer? 4 to 6 weeks minimum. The room went silent. That's past your departure date, someone said unnecessarily. Yes, Carson's face did that thing again. The purple-red thing. Why didn't you mention this earlier? You didn't ask. You were too busy celebrating Wesley's strategic vision. Low blow, maybe, but I was past the point of playing nice. This is sabotage, Carson said. This is what happens when you build critical infrastructure through one person and then replace them with someone who doesn't know the system. I didn't sabotage anything, Carson. You just never bothered to learn how your own company ran. One of the VPs, a woman named Juliet, who'd always been decent to me, spoke up. What would it take to ensure a smooth transition? I looked at her, then at Carson. Time, training, neither of which you were planning to provide until you realized Wesley couldn't just plug and play. What if we extended your contract, Juliet asked, on a consulting basis? You'd have flexibility, a higher rate, and we'd maintain continuity. Carson started to object, but Juliet cut him off. Do you want this platform to collapse, or do you want to solve the problem? He deflated slightly. What's your rate? I'd thought about this. Calculated what I was worth versus what they paid me. 3 times my current salary, 3-month minimum contract, no management responsibilities, purely knowledge transfer and vendor relations. That's ridiculous, Carson sputtered. That's market rate for emergency consulting to fix a situation you created. 150%, he countered. 250. And I want it in writing that Wesley isn't my supervisor in any capacity. Juliet glanced at Carson. Do it. We shook on it and I sent over a contract template that evening. They signed it the morning after. My last day as a full-time employee was Friday. My first day as a consultant making nearly 3 times my old salary was Monday. Funny how that worked out. The consulting arrangement was supposed to last 3 months. It lasted 5, not because I dragged it out, but because every time they thought they were close to independence, they'd discover another system, another relationship, another piece of institutional knowledge they needed. Wesley tried, I'll give him that. He put in long hours, asked questions as time went on, and slowly started understanding the complexity of what I'd built. But understanding and executing were different skills. He could comprehend the architecture, he couldn't maintain the relationships that held it together. Vendors didn't trust him the way they trusted me. The clients were polite but distant. The whole ecosystem I'd cultivated in 18 months couldn't be transferred through documentation alone. 2 months into my consulting contract, Pettage Industries formally left Crestline Technologies and hired me directly as an independent consultant to build them a custom platform. Alavis Group followed 3 weeks later. By month 3, I had more work than I could handle. I hired 2 junior developers, rented a proper office space, and filed incorporation papers for my own company. Not a competitor to Crestline exactly, but definitely not friendly to them either. Carson stopped speaking to me directly. All communication went through Juliet, who'd become the de facto project manager for cleaning up the mess. He's furious, she told me over coffee one afternoon. Feels like you orchestrated this whole thing. I documented my resignation and offered consulting services. The rest was just market forces. You're not wrong, she said, but between you and me, watching his golden boy crash and burn has been the most satisfying thing I've witnessed in my career here. How bad is it? I asked. She smiled grimly. Wesley's on a performance improvement plan, Carson's under pressure from the board and they're losing clients faster than they can replace them. What about Phoenix? Still running, barely, not growing, and the clients who stayed are asking why their service level has dropped.
I sipped my coffee and said nothing. You could come back, Juliet said, properly this time. VP title, real equity. Carson wouldn't be your direct supervisor. I set my cup down carefully. 2 years ago, that offer would have changed my life. Now I'm building something that's actually mine. No politics, no watching less qualified people get promoted over me. Just work and results. Fair enough, she said. Had to try. Appreciated, though. We finished our coffee and I went back to my office. My office, not a cubicle, not a desk in an open floor plan, an actual office with my name on the door and windows overlooking the city. The consulting contract ended after 5 months. They'd finally managed to transfer enough vendor relationships and train Wesley sufficiently that he could stumble through without constant supervision. My final invoice was the biggest check I'd ever received. I framed it and hung it on my wall, not out of arrogance, but as a reminder of what I was worth when I stopped accepting less. Carson never reached out personally. No thank you, no acknowledgement, just a wire transfer and an automatically generated email receipt. Fine by me, but the story didn't end there. It never really does in these situations. The consequences kept rippling outward like stones thrown in water. 6 months after I left Crestline Technologies, I got a LinkedIn message from Wesley. Hey Harper, hope you're doing well. I wanted to reach out because I'm actually leaving Crestline next month. Been thinking a lot about everything that happened and realized I was way out of my depth. You tried to tell me and I didn't listen. Anyway, I'm going back to school for my MBA. Maybe I'll actually learn something this time. No hard feelings if you don't respond. Just wanted to say you were right about pretty much everything. I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to ignore it, let it sit unread as a small act of petty revenge, but another part, the part that remembered being young, stupid, and overconfident, felt almost like sympathy. I replied, "Good luck with the MBA. My advice, listen more than you talk, and never take credit for work you didn't do. You'll go further that way." He sent back a thumbs-up emoji. We never spoke again. Around the same time, I got a more interesting message from Fiona, the board member from that fateful happy hour. Harper, the board has been discussing a restructuring at Crestline Technologies. Carson Blake will be transitioning to an advisory role. We're looking for someone to take over as COO with a focus on operations and client relations. Your name came up. Would you be interested in a conversation? I read it 3 times, feeling that old familiar pull. The validation I'd wanted so desperately 18 months ago was now arriving exactly when I didn't need it anymore. I thought about it for a day, imagining walking back into that building as COO, imagined Carson's face, imagined the sweet, sweet justice of taking his job after he'd tried to erase my contributions. Then I thought about my company. 6 employees now, growing steadily, 3 major clients and a pipeline of prospects, full control over my time, projects, and future. I replied, "Appreciate the consideration, but I'm not interested. I've built something here that I'm proud of, and I'm not going back to corporate politics, even in a leadership role. That said, if you need consulting services for the transition, I'm available at my standard rate." She replied with a laughing emoji, "And you've learned well. Best of luck with your company." The real ending came almost a year after I left. I was at an industry conference, one of those massive conventions where everyone networks aggressively and pretends to care about panel discussions. I had just finished presenting on a stage about client relationship management, speaking to a room of 300 people about building sustainable business practices. As I left the stage, someone stopped me in the corridor. Carson Blake. He looked older, tired. The swagger I remembered had been replaced by something uncomfortably close to humility. "Harper," he said, "that was a good talk. Thank you." Awkward silence stretched between us. He shifted his weight, clearly wrestling with something. "I owe you an apology," he finally said, "for everything, for not recognizing your contributions, for bringing in Wesley the way I did, for treating you like you were replaceable when you were actually the foundation holding everything together." I waited. Didn't make it easy for him. "I've had time to think about my mistakes," he continued. "The board made it clear where I went wrong, and watching what you've built, it's obvious I was an idiot for not investing in you." "Yes," I said simply. "You were." He flinched. "Is there anything I can do to make it right?" "You can learn from it. I said. Recognize the people who actually do the work. Give credit where it's due. Stop hiring based on pedigree instead of competence. He nodded. Fair enough. Also, I added, tell the real story. Not that I pursued other opportunities. Tell them I quit because you handed my project to an unqualified intern and I was tired of being invisible. I can do that, he said quietly. Then we're square? I started to walk past him, then paused. One more thing. Wesley's apology felt genuine. Yours feels like reputation management. If you really want to make things right, be honest. You're sorry because you were wrong, not because you were caught. I left him in the corridor and headed to reception. Later that night, back in my hotel room, I reflected on the journey from undervalued employee to founder, from fighting for scraps of recognition to commanding a stage. The revenge I'd once imagined had been replaced by something better, success that spoke for itself. I didn't need Carson to fail, I just needed to succeed, and I had. Harper Strategic Solutions grew steadily. We built exactly what I'd created at Crestline, but this time with integrity, ownership, and a team of people who'd also been overlooked. By year 5, we had 47 employees, 8-figure revenue, and no interest in being acquired. This was mine. Speaking invites poured in, not for ego, but because my story resonated. Thousands of women saw themselves in it. Competent, invisible, watching less qualified men rise while they kept the machine running. In one interview, a journalist asked if I regretted leaving Crestline. I regret staying as long as I did, I said. I used to think hard work would earn me recognition. The best decision I ever made was realizing I didn't need their validation. I could validate myself. The article went viral. My inbox filled with messages from people in the same trap. Some joined my company, others started their own. A quiet network of the underestimated began rising together. Crestline never recovered. Carson retired early. Wesley got his MBA and, by all accounts, grew up. The company was eventually sold for a fraction of its potential. I felt nothing when I heard. No triumph, just clarity. Because the best revenge isn't destruction, it's building something so undeniable that your absence becomes impossible to ignore. It's creating a life where the people who dismissed you no longer matter. 5 years after I walked out of that bar, I sat in my corner office in a building I owned, watching the sunset. My phone buzzed. A text from Bryce, now my VP of Operations. The board meeting went well. Q4 projections are up 23%. The team's killing it. Nice work. Drinks Friday. You're buying. Obviously. My calendar held only work that mattered. Client presentations, a podcast, and a keynote on workplace equity. No theater, no pretense, just purpose. Then the phone rang, an unknown number. Janet Reeves from Peak Ridge, now COO, offering me a VP role with a substantial package. I appreciate it, but I'm happy where I am, though I'd be glad to consult. She laughed. Figured you'd say that. You've built something impressive, Harper. People notice. After we hung up, I thought of Wesley in his borrowed suit, of Carson's hollow charisma, and then of my team, my company, and my life rebuilt from that resignation letter. And I smiled. They didn't crush me. They freed me.